Hey, Trig kids. Today we're looking at using your calculator to try and find trig values on Trig with Mr. Forbes. Notes out, and away we go. All right, almost all calculator values of trig functions are approximations because most trig functions are actually what are called transcendental numbers. They're, sorry, not transcendental, irrational numbers. They're just decimals that keep on going forever. When evaluating trigonometric functions of angles and degrees, remember that the calculator must be in degree mode, which you all should be, but it's a good idea to check and make sure that you're in degree mode. Later on, we're going to look at radians, and so we're going to have to switch back and forth, so you have to make sure we know which mode we're in. Calculators do not have cosecant, secant, or cotangent keys, so you need to know how to use your reciprocal identities to find these values. I haven't showed you how to do that yet because I knew this lesson was coming up. So approximate the value of each trig function. So on my calculator, I want to make sure that I am in degrees. So if I go to mode, I am in degrees, so I'm good to go. So I can type in my angle. So I want tangent of 60 degrees. And again, to do that, I'm going to go to angle. There's my degrees, and I want 43 minutes. So again, second angle, and there's minutes. Remember seconds if you need it. Our alpha, the plus sign down here, is seconds. And that will get me a value. And we're going to just put all of those decimals down. So 1.783194261. So there's our value. Same thing, we can do cosine, 193.622. So again, this is decimal degrees. There is no degrees, minutes, seconds. It's just decimal degrees. And again, that's going to give us a value. And we're just going to write down that whole number, which is negative 0.97187064008. What about cosecant? How are we going to find cosecant? Well, there's no cosecant button on your calculator, but we know cosecant is 1 over sine. So we're going to switch this to 1 over sine of the same angle, 35.8471. So on our calculator, we're going to do 1 divide, or you can do alpha y equals again. And get the y equals in there. Alpha y equals, and do fraction decimal. So 1 over sine of 35.8471. That's going to get us our decimal, which is 1.707579671. Again, there is no secant on our calculator, so we're going to have to use our reciprocal identities. Secant is the reciprocal of cosine, so we have now cosine of negative 287, and that is 1 divided by cosine, negative 287. And that gets us 3.42030362. Sometimes we need to find the measure of an angle having a certain trig function value. To do that, we're using inverse trig functions. Inverse trig functions are functions used to find the angle measure given a trig value. For that, we're using on your calculator the second trig function, sine, cosine, tangent. So that's sine inverse, cosine inverse, tangent inverse. Remember, inverse is not reciprocal. It's changing directions. So where sine of theta is equal to some number x, now we're saying if we have the number x and we want to go back and find theta, then we're going to do sine inverse of x. It's going to give us our angle measure theta. This is an inverse function, like we looked at the end of college algebra. We flip it. So that's what the inverse means. So given a trig value, we can find the associated angle theta. Use the calculator to find angle theta in the interval 0 to 90 degrees. That satisfies each condition, round to the hundredths place. So if we know that cosine of theta is equal to this number, we want to flip the number and theta. So we're going to say then cosine inverse of that number, 0.921185456, then is going to equal theta. So that's how we're going to find our angle measure given the trig value. We're going to type that into our calculator. as second cosine, and that's 0.9211854056. And we should get an angle measure. We're going to round this one to the nearest hundredths place, which is 22.90 degrees. What about cotangent? Well, there is no inverse cotangent, so we have to change this first to tangent. So tangent of theta, we know, is 1 over cotangent of theta, which is 1 over 1.4466474. And then we're going to put that on our calculator. That's going to give us a number. So instead of using cotangent, we're changing to tangent. So tangent of theta has to be the number 0.6912534457. Now we can find the angle. Now, how come it works that we can find the inverse trig function with tangent instead of cotangent? Big idea from a couple of videos ago. Those are cofunctions. Has to be the same angle. So we're still okay. So now we want tangent inverse of that big number, 0.6912534457. We're going to type that into our calculator, and that's going to get us 34.65 degrees. Again, need the label of degree, otherwise it's going to mean radians. Remember, when finding the angle, the reciprocal is taken before the inverse key. So for finding the angle, like we did on B, the reciprocal is taken before the inverse function key. When finding the trig function value, the reciprocal is taken after the function key. For example, again, if we're finding cosecant of the angle, that's the sine, it's 1 over sine, right? Versus if we're going the other direction. So pay attention to that. Homework then is 2-3, page 68, 2 through 66 evens, and 67. Have a good day, Maroons.